The World Food Programme says close to 14 million people could be pushed into emergency levels of hunger due to severe funding cuts from top donors. The WFP, traditionally the UN's most funded agency, says its finances have never been more challenged. Funding is set to fall 40% this year, cutting the agency's budget to $6.4 billion. The US still remains its largest donor, but has slashed contributions by nearly $3 billion. And other major sponsors have also pulled back. The WFP reports that 6 countries are currently facing major disruptions, which will only worsen by year end. And among them, famine has already been declared in Gaza and Sudan. Food aid is also reaching less than 10% of those in need in Afghanistan as winter approaches. And amid the WFP's warnings, the UN is also marking World Food Day. The global agency has highlighted the strains on global food security ahead of next month's COP30 meeting. And that's where leaders are expected to make food systems central to climate action. And in a world of plenty, why are millions still going without? Shin reports.
There's enough food in the world today to feed every person on Earth, and then some. But food has not always been abundant. In fact, it wasn't even guaranteed. That is until 10,000 years ago when humans began to farm. That agricultural revolution was a turning point. It allowed us to settle, build, and create the very foundations of civilization. Today, more than 1/3 of Earth's land is dedicated to farming. Thanks to technology, modernization, and the Green Revolution, food production expanded rapidly, well into the 21st century. In 2023, the world produced 9.9 billion tons of primary crops. We're now producing more food than there are people on Earth, enough for about 1.2 tons per person each year. That's roughly 3.3 kilograms of food every day for every individual on the planet. So why does hunger persist? About 2.3 billion people still experienced food insecurity in 2024. That's nearly 1 in 4 people globally. And in 2024, 53 countries and territories faced acute food crises, more than the year before. Last year, in Asia alone, 1.1 billion people faced moderate or severe food insecurity. There's enough food for everyone, but billions are still going hungry. And that's because the challenge isn't growing food, it's distributing it. Then let's take a look at Asia, a powerhouse of agricultural exports. Across the region, the pattern is clear. Nations like Thailand, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh rake in billions of dollars each year from farming. They ship out everything from rice and fruit to palm oil, jute, and seafood. But those export numbers don't mean their people are getting essentials on the table. India, one of the largest food exporters on the planet, is also home to some 172 million undernourished people. Child malnutrition rates here are among the highest in the world. Indonesia is another big exporter, yet up to 45 million Indonesians are at risk of hunger, and 7% of the entire population is considered by the Bright Institute to be undernourished. About 16 million people in Bangladesh live with food insecurity, and up to a quarter of its children may have development issues related to malnourishment. Pakistan's exports for food are steadily growing, but around 11 million people still face high levels of acute food insecurity. Over in Thailand, one of the world's biggest rice producers, an estimated 6 million people go hungry, while 1 in 10 children face severe food poverty. So why are these major global exporters facing such extreme levels of hidden hunger? One reason is rising food prices. Inflation has pushed up the average cost of essential food items, and it could get worse. Last year, 2.6 billion people could not afford a healthy diet. More than half of them were in Asia. A healthy diet means more than just having a full plate. It's about having enough variety, enough nutrients, and the right balance to stay strong. Food exporters are also unable to guarantee domestic affordability. When it's more profitable to sell food abroad, producers prioritize foreign markets, so local supplies shrink, and prices soar, making produce unaffordable, which leads to poverty and unequal access. Hunger exists not because there's no food, but because tens of millions are priced out of it. Low incomes, weak infrastructure, and deep-rooted inequality mean nutritious food often does not get to the people who need it most. External shocks are exacerbating the problem. Global conflicts and the COVID-19 pandemic have deepened hunger by disrupting supply chains and inflating prices. And then there's climate change. Extreme weather, the floods in Bangladesh, heat waves in India, droughts in Indonesia are just a few. These damaged harvests pushed more people into food insecurity. 10 years ago, some 190 countries set the goal of ending hunger by the year of 2030. That's just 5 years away, and the world is falling behind on target. UN agencies are urging stronger policies, more open markets, and long-term solutions to fix what's broken in the food system. Because the real challenge isn't in producing food, it's making sure everyone gets to eat it.
And to speak more about this, we're now joined by Patricia Fracassi. She is Senior Nutrition and Food System Officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us. We should really start off by asking you to explain more about this concept of hidden hunger and how does it differ from the more visible forms of famine or acute food crises we see in other parts of the world?
Thank you. So hidden hunger refers to micronutrient deficiency, which is the lack of essential vitamins and minerals like iron, iodine, zinc. And this is despite adequate calorie intake. And as you mentioned, it's an invisible form of malnutrition, unlike famine or acute hunger, which are visible and often linked to emergency. So hidden hunger is chronic and invisible and affects long-term health, cognitive development, and productivity. So globally, 2 billion people suffer from hidden hunger, which is 1 in 2 children under 5 years, and 2 in 3 women of reproductive age. And they are at least deficient in one key micronutrient.
When it comes to Asia, why do some of Asia's top food exporters really continue to struggle with hunger and malnutrition at home?
Yes, this was already mentioned before, because we see that there is a focus on exporting what are considered cash crops. So these are crops that are produced majorly for income. And there are not enough policy or strategy that instead allow the redistribution and equal redistribution within the domestic market. So poverty and inequality is a major contributor of hunger and malnutrition at home. We have seen that the price continue to increase, and this affects vulnerable categories much more. In addition to that, we have to see the impact of climate shock and displacement. So countries like Philippines and Bangladesh faced severe weather events and the refugee crisis in 2024. So this is all contributing to hunger and malnutrition despite increased food export.
When speaking of exporting food, how do export-driven policies really affect local food prices and the access of it, especially for low-income communities?
Yes, as I mentioned, there is an emphasis on cash crops over nutrient-rich staples. So we see that these crops are really produced to generate income, while other crops that really would benefit the nutrition especially of the most vulnerable. And here we are talking about nutrient-rich cereal, vegetables, fruits, pulses. These are all food products that are less incentivized. They don't receive adequate subsidies. And because they are perishable, there is less of an incentive for producer to produce them, and also for actors within the food system to distribute them. So we see that there is a huge loss during the harvest, but also post-harvest. But these are the food that need to be in the plate of the families in order to prevent malnutrition, especially hidden hunger, which we have seen is the deficiency of essential vitamins and minerals.
Well, looking ahead, Patricia, what does the path to food security really look like, especially, with the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goal deadline that's just 5 years away?
Well, there are many challenges, but we also see that there are successful models, and these successful models need to be in a way discussed, shared, and replicated. And it's very important to consider also local development. We are very much focused on, let's say, export-driven policies, but there is also, this comes at the risk of developing a local solution for the communities within the country. So rather than looking at, let's say, regulation, which are important, we should also equally focus on how to incentivize distribution of nutritious food. And let's say that export ban, for example, discourage agriculture investment and reduce rural income, while at the same time, what is really needed within country are policy that support the inclusion of farmers, of actors within the food system, while at the same time protecting consumer from high increase in prices. And here the role of the market and trade is fundamental when looking at the mediating factor between what is produced and what is consumed.
Well, we have to leave it at that, but thank you very much for explaining and speaking with us. We were speaking with Patricia Fracassi, Senior Nutrition and Food System Officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations.